I rubbed stinging ash and crushed wolfsbane into my skin every single morning, begging the gods it would mask the truth. I was a rogue, a slave destined for the fighting pits. But everything changed the night the Alpha King cornered me in the pitch-black cellars of Croft Manor. My true name is Ellis Rousseau, though for 5 agonizing years the ledgers of Oakhaven Fortress knew me only as Bess, a mute, half-blind, human scullery maid. In the year 1247, survival for a rogue werewolf meant erasing your very existence. If the highborn wolves discovered what I was, an untethered, packless female, I wouldn't just be killed. I would be dragged to the breeding pens or thrown into the subterranean fighting pits for the amusement of the nobility. I lived in the shadow of Lord Reginald Croft, a cruel, bloated man who ruled the Eastern Territories with an iron fist and a whip made of woven silver. Croft prided himself on his pure household. He loathed humans, but he needed them to scrub his floors, butcher his meat, and empty his chamber pots. To him I was just another fragile, scentless human. Keeping that illusion alive was a daily torture. Every morning before the sun crested the jagged peaks of the Dragon-Tooth Mountains, I would steal away to the soot-stained corners of the kitchens. I took the cold ash from the hearths, mixed it with rendered animal fat, and crushed petals of dried wolfsbane, a poison to our kind. I rubbed this toxic paste over my pulse, points my wrists, my neck, behind my ears, and the backs of my knees. It burned like acid, leaving my skin raw, blistered, and perpetually inflamed. The poison seeped into my bloodstream, suppressing my wolf, keeping her locked away in a cage of perpetual agony. It dulled my senses, dimmed my eyesight, and made my hands shake. But it completely neutralized my natural scent. To the supernatural noses of the guards patrolling Oakhaven, I smelled only of lye firewood and human misery. I was surviving. Barely. Until the ravens brought the news that shattered my fragile existence. The Alpha King was coming. King Alaric Montgomery was a legend whispered about in the dark corners of the slave quarters. He was the sovereign of the Northern Vales, a warlord who had unified the fractured packs through sheer, unadulterated violence. They said he stood 7 feet tall, that his wolf was the color of midnight, and that he could smell a liar from a mile away. He was coming to Oakhaven on a royal inspection, hunting for dissenting lords and hidden rogues. His hatred for rogues was renowned. It was rumored a pack of them had slaughtered his mother when he was just a pup. Panic seized me the day his banners, a golden wolf, rampant on a field of crimson, appeared on the horizon. The entire fortress was thrown into a frenzy of preparation. Lord Croft, sweating and barking orders, demanded the castle be scrubbed from the dungeons to the parapets. "Wash yourselves." The head housekeeper, a vicious she-wolf named Greta, shrieked at us human slaves. "If the king smells so much as a drop of sour sweat on you, I'll have you flayed." I didn't wash. Instead, I doubled my dose of wolfsbane. I ground the toxic herb until my fingers bled, applying the paste so thickly that I nearly fainted from the toxic shock. My inner wolf whimpered, curled into a tight, sick ball within my soul. "Quiet," I begged her. "Just for 3 days. Stay dead for 3 days, or we both die." When King Alaric finally rode through the portcullis, the very air in Oakhaven shifted. Even through my poisoned, dulled senses, I felt the sheer, crushing weight of his aura. He didn't ride a horse. He walked alongside a massive armored destrier, his movements fluid and deadly. He was not the towering monster the rumors claimed, but he was undeniably terrifying. Broad-shouldered, dressed in dark leather and chainmail, with hair the color of polished obsidian. Beside him walked his beta, a scarred warrior named Gideon Fletcher, whose eyes scanned the courtyard with lethal efficiency. I was forced to stand in the courtyard with the other servants, my head bowed deep, my heart hammering against my ribs. As King Alaric walked past the line of slaves, his boots crunching against the gravel, the air grew freezing cold. Then he stopped. He stopped right in front of me. My breath hitched. The scent of him pine needles, petrichor, and raw crackling ozone cut right through the nauseating stench of the wolfsbane. It was intoxicating. It made the dormant wolf inside me stir a dangerous spark of life in her dark cage. What happened to her skin? Alaric's voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the cobblestones. He was speaking to Lord Croft. I pox your grace," Croft stammered, clearly terrified by the king's sudden halt. "She is a lowly human from the plague villages. She handles the lye and the hearths. We keep her out of sight." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to the moon goddess. I felt the heat of the king's body. He leaned in just a fraction. I could hear the slow, deliberate intake of his breath. He was smelling me. He was smelling the ash, the fat, and the poison. For one agonizing second, I thought I was dead. I braced for his hand to snap to my throat. Instead, he exhaled a sound of faint disgust. "Keep her out of the kitchens. I won't have my food tasting of ash and disease." At once, my king, Croft bowed. Alaric moved on. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my knees trembling so violently I nearly collapsed. I had survived the inspection, but the true nightmare of his visit was only just beginning. The great banquet that evening was a spectacle of excess. Lord Croft, desperate to hide his own treasonous activities, namely skimming gold from the royal tithes and secretly forging silver weapons, pulled out all the stops. Long oak tables groaned under the weight of roasted boars, glazed pheasants, and barrels of dark spiced wine. Despite the king's orders, the kitchen was severely understaffed after several human slaves collapsed from exhaustion. Greta, the housekeeper, dragged me by the ear back into the service rotation. "Keep your head down, keep your diseased skin covered, and pour the wine," she hissed, shoving a massive silver pitcher into my hands. "If you spill a single drop, I'll boil you in the tallow vats." The great hall was suffocating. Dozens of alpha and beta wolves from surrounding territories sat at the tables, their collective body heat and predatory scents overwhelming. I kept to the shadows near the tapestries, a silent, invisible ghost pouring wine. King Alaric sat at the head table, flanked by Lord Croft and Beta Gideon. Alaric barely touched his food. His golden eyes, sharp and predatory, tracked every movement in the room. He looked bored, but it was the calculated boredom of a lion watching a herd of gazelles. As I approached the high table to refill Croft's goblet, I caught a snippet of conversation that made my blood run cold. "The eastern borders have been quiet, Your Grace." Croft was saying, his voice unctuous. "We have purged the rogue filth just as you commanded. Not a single stray dog breathes within 50 miles of Oakhaven." It was a blatant lie. Croft ran a secret fighting ring in the deep cellars. He kept a dozen starved, feral rogues locked in silver-lined cages for his friends to bet on. If the king found out, Croft's head would be on a spike. But that wasn't the twist. As I stepped back into the alcove, I bumped into two of Croft's personal guards. They didn't notice me in the dark, their voices dropped to harsh whispers. "Is it done?" one asked. "The nightshade is in the king's private decanter," the other replied. "When he retires to his chambers, one glass will paralyze him. Lord Croft will claim a rogue assassin breached the walls. With the king out of the way, the northern packs will fall into civil war, and Croft will seize the eastern trade routes." My heart stopped. Regicide. Lord Croft was going to poison the Alpha King. I backed away, my mind spinning. This wasn't my problem. Let the highborn wolves slaughter each other. If Alaric died, maybe Croft's regime would crumble and I could escape. But as I looked across the hall at King Alaric, something twisted painfully in my chest. My wolf, weak and poisoned, whined. It wasn't loyalty. It was something deeper, something ancient and primal that I didn't understand. I couldn't let him drink the poison. But how could a mute, diseased human slave warn the most powerful werewolf in the world without exposing herself? Panic and the sweltering heat of the hall were taking their toll. I was sweating profusely. I could feel the ash and wolfsbane paste beginning to melt, sliding down my neck beneath my coarse tunic. The burning sensation intensified, but worse, my natural scent was fighting to break through. I smelled like rain on dry earth, a scent unique to the slaughtered Rousseau bloodline. If any of these wolves caught a whiff, I was doomed. I had to get out. I had to reapply the paste. I set the silver pitcher down on a side table with a loud clack. The sound echoed over the low hum of conversation. Several heads turned. King Alaric's head snapped toward me, his golden eyes locked onto mine across the dimly lit hall. For a fraction of a second, the bored king vanished, replaced by an apex predator. His nostrils flared. He smelled it. A tiny drop of my true scent had breached the poison barrier. Terror, cold and absolute, washed over me. I didn't wait for him to stand. I turned and fled. I abandoned the hall, slipping through the heavy oak doors that led to the servants' corridors. I ran blindly, my bare feet slapping against the cold stone, taking the winding stairs down into the labyrinthine cellars of the fortress. It was pitch black down here, smelling of damp earth, old wine, and the faint coppery tang of the fighting pits miles below. I ducked behind a row of massive oak wine casks, gasping for air, my hands frantically scraping the dry ash from my pockets, trying to rub it onto my sweating neck. I was shaking so hard I dropped half of it. "Calm down," I whispered to myself, breaking my mute facade. He didn't see you. He doesn't know. Crunch. A footstep echoed in the dark. I froze. The cellars were off limits to the guests. The guards were stationed upstairs. Crunch. Slower this time. Deliberate. The temperature in the cellar plummeted. The scent of pine and ozone rolled through the damp air, thick and suffocating. It was him. He hadn't just smelled me. He had tracked me. He had bypassed his own beta, bypassed Croft's guards, and descended into the dark alone. "You run remarkably fast for a half-blind, scullery maid." A voice rumbled from the shadows. It was quiet, yet it seemed to vibrate against the marrow of my bones. I pressed my back against the rough wood of the cask, clamping my hands over my mouth. A massive silhouette detached itself from the gloom. King Alaric stood at the end of the aisle. The faint moonlight, bleeding through a ground-level iron grate, caught the gold in his eyes. They were glowing. His wolf was right at the surface. I caught a scent in the hall. He stepped closer, his boots making no sound now. He moved with terrifying grace, a scent that should not exist, a scent that belongs to a bloodline that was eradicated 20 years ago. He stopped mere inches from me. He was so large he completely blocked out the moonlight. I was trapped between the cask and the Alpha King. He reached out. I flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his large, calloused fingers gently brushed the collar of my tunic aside. He smeared the ash and sweat away from my neck. The touch sent a jolt of raw electricity straight to my core. My wolf let out a deafening howl in my mind, slamming against her cage, begging to be let out. Alaric leaned down his face, buried in the crook of my neck. He inhaled deeply, a long, shuddering breath. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, the pupils blown wide open, eclipsing the gold. "Wolfsbane," he whispered, his voice laced with a dangerous mixture of fury and awe. "You are poisoning yourself to hide." He reached up his thumb, tracing my jawline. "You aren't a human slave, and you aren't just any rogue." He leaned in until his lips brushed my ear, sealing my fate with 5 impossible words. "Hello, Princess Ellis of Rousseau. Hello, Princess Ellis of Rousseau." The title hit me like a physical blow. The damp cellar walls seemed to spin, the faint moonlight blurring, as my mind violently rejected his words. My lungs seized. I pressed myself harder against the oak wine cask, wishing the wood would swallow me whole. "I don't know what you are talking about." I forced the words past my trembling lips. My voice, unused to speaking, above a coarse whisper, for 5 years was hoarse and broken. "I am Bess. I am from the plague villages of—" "Do not insult me, and do not lie to your alpha." King Alaric interrupted, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He didn't move back. His sheer size caged me, his body heat radiating through my damp, ash-stained tunic. The ledger of 1242, signed by Lord Harrington, stated that the entire Rousseau lineage burned in the southern manor fire. The official decree declared that rogue wolves set the blaze. But I have seen the private correspondence of Lady Beatrice Harrington. I know the fire was a cover-up for a massacre orchestrated by my own uncle, Duke Alastair Montgomery, to seize the southern silver mines. I stopped breathing. The forbidden names I had buried deep in my subconscious echoed in the dark. Lady Beatrice, Duke Alastair. They were the ones who had slaughtered my parents, the Alphas of the South. I had escaped through the servants' tunnels, a terrified pup masking my scent in the ashes of my own burning home. "You have been hunting me to finish the job." I whispered, a tear finally breaking free, cutting a clean track through the soot on my cheek. "To secure the mines." Alaric's golden eyes flared with sudden, violent anger. But the anger wasn't directed at me. He raised his hand, his thumb catching the tear before it fell. The calloused skin of his thumb against my cheek sent a shockwave of heat straight down my spine. My wolf, weak and battered by years of poison, slammed against her mental cage, howling a single primal word at her. "I have spent 5 years tearing this continent apart looking for you, Ellis." Alaric said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that shook my very foundation. "When Kalen, my lead scout, found a single set of pup tracks leading away from the ash of your estate, I tore my uncle's throat out. I took the crown to protect the packs, yes. But I took it so I would have the power to find the girl who smelled like rain on dry earth. My fated mate. The revelation threatened to break my mind. The Alpha King, the terrifying warlord of the Northern Vales, was my mate, and he hadn't come to Oakhaven to hunt me. He had come because his relentless search had finally led him here. But there was no time for the romance of the moon goddess's legends. Reality, brutal and immediate, crashed back into me. "You are going to die tonight," I blurted out, grabbing his leather-clad forearms. The moment my skin touched his, sparks of absolute power danced across my fingertips. But I ignored them. "Lord Croft, he isn't just skimming from your tithes. He runs a rogue fighting ring in the deep caverns, and tonight he is committing regicide." Alaric's eyes narrowed, the golden hue sharpening into blades. "Explain." "I was in the hall." I spoke quickly, my words stumbling over each other in my panic. "I overheard Commander Kalen's name, but it was a ruse. 2 of Croft's personal guards were whispering in the alcove. They have laced your private decanter with nightshade. When you retire to your chambers, they expect you to drink. The paralysis will set in within minutes. Croft intends to blame it on a rogue assassin, use the chaos to fracture the Northern Alliance, and seize the eastern trade routes for himself. A terrifying silence fell over the cellar. I watched as the King of the North processed the treason. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look surprised. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face, revealing elongated canines. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched a rabbit walk willingly into a snare. "Gideon." Alaric commanded his voice, barely a murmur, yet it carried an unnatural resonant frequency. From the absolute pitch-black shadows near the stairs, a figure detached itself. Beta Gideon stepped into the moonlight, his scarred face impassive. He had been there the entire time, masking his presence perfectly. "You heard the princess?" Alaric asked, his eyes never leaving mine. "Every word, Your Grace," Gideon replied, bowing his head respectfully toward me. The gesture made my stomach clench. Nobody had shown me respect in half a decade. "Shall I order the royal guard to slaughter Croft and his men in the hall?" "No," Alaric said softly. He reached down, unfastening the heavy, fur-lined cloak from his broad shoulders, and wrapped it securely around my trembling frame. The cloak was entirely saturated with his scent pine ozone and power. It enveloped me, pushing back the nauseating smell of my own poisoned skin. If we kill Croft in the hall, his loyalists will claim I am a tyrant who murders his hosts without proof. We need him to spring the trap. We need him to confess his treason where my loyal alphas can hear it. "You want to fake your own death," Gideon stated, a hint of a dark smirk playing on his lips. "Exactly," Alaric said. He turned his attention back to me, his massive hands resting on my shoulders. "Ellis, you must stop applying the wolfsbane immediately. The withdrawal will be agonizing. Your wolf has been starved and poisoned for 5 years. When the herb leaves your system, the fever will hit you like a battering ram, and your shift will fight to break free." I can't," I stammered, terrified of the pain, terrified of the beast I had locked away. "If I shift here, Croft's guards will sense the energy surge." "You won't be here," Alaric promised. "Gideon is going to take you to the forgotten armory beneath the east tower. It is lined with lead and iron. It will mask your energy. You will stay there until the blood is washed from the floors." "Do you understand? And what about you?" I asked, my fingers involuntarily gripping the front of his tunic. The mate bond, though dormant, was screaming at me not to let him walk into a room with poisoned wine and armed traitors. Alaric leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. The contact was electric, a grounding wire in a storm of chaos. "I'm going to go upstairs, drink a glass of blackberry juice that Gideon will swap for the nightshade, and wait for a traitor to monologue. Then I am going to burn Oakhaven to the ground." The withdrawal began exactly as Alaric warned, with a fever that felt like liquid fire in my veins. Gideon had smuggled me through the lightless, forgotten corridors of Oakhaven, depositing me in the abandoned armory, just as the midnight bells began to toll. The heavy iron door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the absolute dark. For the first hour, I simply sat shivering on the cold stone floor, wrapped in Alaric's cloak. Then the wolfsbane began to break down in my bloodstream. It started as a dull ache in my bones, rapidly escalating into a searing, blinding agony. I collapsed onto the dust-covered floor, screaming, silently biting down on the thick wool of the cloak to muffle my cries. My muscles spasmed violently. I could feel my inner wolf, the beautiful, terrifying creature I had suppressed, clawing her way out of the dark. My vision, previously blurred by the poison, began to sharpen into impossible clarity, piercing the gloom of the armory. I could hear the scurry of rats in the walls, the drip of water miles away, And then the chaos erupting above. Far above my head, in the royal guest chambers, the trap had been sprung. Through the thick stone, my newly awakened werewolf hearing picked up the sound of splintering wood. The heavy oak doors of the king's chambers had been kicked in. "The king is paralyzed," a voice shouted. It was Croft, his tone dripping with mock horror and genuine triumph. "A rogue assassin. Secure the perimeter. Slaughter the king's guard." The clash of steel ringing against steel vibrated through the foundation of the castle. I writhed on the floor, my bones cracking and reshaping as the partial shift overtook me. My fingernails lengthened into lethal razor-sharp claws, scraping deep grooves into the stone. My teeth elongated my jaw, aching with the force of the transformation. The pain was eclipsed only by the overwhelming surge of raw, unadulterated power. I wasn't just a werewolf. I was a Rousseau alpha, and my mate was in danger. I couldn't stay in the armory. Stumbling to my feet, my breath coming in ragged feral gasps, I threw Alaric's cloak over my shoulders. My senses were dialed to an agonizing maximum. I tracked the scent of blood, silver and ozone, navigating the hidden servant tunnels with a speed I had never possessed. I burst through a concealed tapestry door on the second floor, stepping out onto the main gallery, overlooking the grand foyer. The scene below was a massacre, bathed in the flickering light of overturned torches. Lord Croft's treasonous guards and mercenaries were locked in brutal, bloody combat with Alaric's royal guard. But my eyes immediately found the center of the room. King Alaric was not paralyzed. He was a god of war unleashed. He hadn't bothered to fully shift. He fought in his human form, his claws extended, his eyes glowing like miniature suns. He moved with a speed that defied physics, dodging a silver-tipped spear, seizing the attacker by the throat, and tossing him into a stone pillar with a sickening crunch. Lord Croft stood on the grand staircase, his face pale and sweating, completely panicked. The trap had failed. His men were being slaughtered by a king who was supposed to be suffocating on his own paralyzed tongue. "Kill him!" Croft shrieked, uncoiling a long, woven silver whip from his belt. "He's just one wolf, swarm him." 3 heavy-set mercenaries armed with silver broadswords rushed Alaric from his blind side. Alaric was busy dispatching 2 of Croft's elite guards and didn't see them coming. Gideon was across the foyer, pinned down by a volley of crossbow fire. My heart stopped. I didn't think. I simply acted on the primal instinct that had been caged for 5 years. I vaulted over the stone balustrade of the gallery. I dropped 20 feet, landing in a crouch directly between Alaric and the 3 mercenaries. The stone floor shattered beneath the impact of my landing. I stood to my full height, throwing off the heavy cloak. I was covered in soot, my scullery-made tunic torn and filthy, but my aura exploded outward. A shockwave of pure alpha dominance, suppressed for half a decade, blasted through the foyer. It was so intense that the mercenaries physically stumbled backward, clutching their ears as my roar tore through the air. "Touch my mate." I snarled, my voice layered with the deep, dual-timbered growl of my wolf, "and I will paint these walls with your blood." The silence that followed was absolute. The fighting ceased entirely. Every wolf in the room, from the lowest mercenary to Beta Gideon, froze, their instincts paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming presence of a Southern alpha. Lord Croft stared at me, his jaw slack, the silver whip dropping limply to his side. "Bess?" He stammered, his mind unable to reconcile the terrified, mute slave with the lethal predator standing before him. Her name. King Alaric stepped up behind me, his chest brushing against my back, his presence a comforting, impenetrable wall of heat, is Queen Ellis of the House Rousseau. And you, Lord Croft, are guilty of high treason regicide and the illegal enslavement of royal blood. Croft backed up a step on the stairs, his eyes darting frantically for an escape route. "It's a lie, she's a filthy rogue. Kill them both." He lunged forward, snapping the silver whip in a desperate, deadly arc, aimed straight for my face. I didn't even flinch. I reached out my reflexes, amplified by the adrenaline and the mate bond, and caught the woven silver whip with my bare hand. The silver seared my flesh, a horrific burning sensation, but I didn't make a sound. I gripped it tighter, letting my blood run down the metallic threads, and gave a violent, brutal yank. Lord Croft was ripped off his feet. He flew through the air, crashing onto the cobblestone floor at my feet with the sound of breaking ribs. Before he could even gasp for air, Alaric's boot came down hard on his chest, pinning him to the floor. Alaric looked down at the traitorous lord, his golden eyes devoid of any mercy. "The Eastern Territories are hereby stripped from your command," Alaric declared, his voice booming through the silent, bloody hall. He looked up at the remaining mercenaries, who immediately dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, exposing their necks in complete submission. The battle was over. The rebellion was crushed before it even began. Alaric stepped back from the cowering lord, signaling for Gideon to take Croft to the dungeons. Then the Alpha King, the most feared warlord in the realm, turned to me. He didn't care about the blood on my hands, the soot on my face, or the jagged burns from the silver whip. He dropped to one knee amidst the carnage of the foyer, taking my burned hand gently in his. "5 years in the dark," Alaric whispered, pressing his lips to my soot-stained knuckles, a vow sealed in blood and shadows. "Never again, Ellis. From this night forward, you rule the light." The poison was gone. The cage was broken. I squeezed his hand, my true scent of rain and earth filling the massive hall, overpowering the stench of death. I was a slave no longer. I was the Alpha Queen, and the true reign of the North had only just begun. Are you entirely hooked on Ellis and Alaric's intense journey from shadows to the throne? If this dramatic tale of betrayal, hidden identities, and fated mates kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow fantasy romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, immersive werewolf sagas every single week.